Okay, hello everybody. My name is Kent Trammell. Thanks for joining the stream. I've just spent the last half hour or so dealing with some technical difficulties. So the stream, I've only been able to get to run at 720p. So I apologize, the quality might be lower than usual. But the guy on the phone said that me upgrading to OS X High Sierra the other day is probably the reason. They haven't quite updated their software, so kind of threw me for a loop. But anyway, let me know if there are stream issues. Otherwise, we'll try and make it through with 720p, and which is a bummer. I'm actually really excited about this stream. I've been having a lot of fun with this topic lately. So I'd love for you to see it in all its 1080p glory, but might have to compromise this time around. So anyway, what are we doing today? We're looking at this idea of matching lighting, which has been a thread on the community forums, and I've done like 4. We've had users do several submissions, and it's been a lot of fun. Just trying, and the idea behind it is just trying to see something that we know is good, that appeals to us, and then study the lighting particularly, how they render it, camera settings, light placement, all those things to get a very similar effect. That's the idea, and it's been a lot of fun. So I figured I would do a stream with that so you can see how I go about this particular process, and we'll go from there. So the artwork that I want to recreate is this piece right here, which is actually from a CG Cookie user, and I just love the depth of field in this one, how extreme it is. I love the colors. It's autumn right now. Leaves are changing vividly here where I live, and it's beautiful. So figured it was appropriate. I love the saturated purples and yellows and reds that are happening in this image. So I also thought this was a good topic for light match because there's not a ton of texture on the character, the focal point. There is on the ground, but it's so blurred out in the depth of field that the point being, like, the less texture there is, the more kind of clay rendering style, the better it is to discern lighting. And so I'm going to focus on this one for this particular example. And it's actually, this morning I was rehearsing, it's actually a lot harder than I was expecting to recreate. I have to do some weird tricks to make it look close. But we're not actually using this scene. I guess I could have done that, but I didn't think to ask the original author. But I've taken our Wrangler character, which we have a course about sculpting this exact character, and I took him, put him in a pose, built this little fence, and we're going to use this as our subject for recreating this type of lighting. Also, a reminder, as you have questions, please let them rip in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. And if I run into bumps along the way, please throw out suggestions, or you see like I'm missing something in particular that could match better, throw out your suggestion. Interact with me. That's the whole idea. All right, let's get started. Let's see here. One of the first things I did, or what I realized, is that I think the camera could maybe match a little bit better. That's going to be important for lighting match, is to position the camera in the best possible way. So I'm going to select that and go turn on lock camera to view, which is in our in panel, the view properties. And I'm using the grid to kind of define where the floor should end up. And so I'm trying to keep the character pretty small in the frame, as we see in the artwork. I think that's looking fairly decent. Maybe turn off lock camera to view for now. I need to add a ground plane. That's something I'm missing. So let's just scale that really, really big. Yeah, I want to scale it so that it looks like a flat horizon. And then about the knee is kind of where the plane is ending. So maybe bring that up just a little bit more. In the image, it looks like the ground plane is closer to the center, vertically speaking. So let's turn on. I'm ready to soak up some wisdom. I appreciate that, Zach. You really set that bar high. I hope I have some wisdom to give you, and don't disappoint. But I'm kidding. All right, I think about maybe there. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. All right, so camera's set up a little bit better. Turn off lock camera to view. And for rendering, this is also a first I think I've done on the stream, is trying to render while streaming. And it worked fine with my test so far, so we'll hope for the best. But I'm going to bring up a much smaller window down here on the right side to optimize this. And I do this anyway if I'm not streaming. But we're going to switch out to the 3D view, hit 0 to go into the camera. And let's see. Seeing the colors on these materials, I actually realized that we're in Blender render. So I'm going to switch that to cycles. And that means we'll have to switch over our world here and use nodes. And let's try, I'm going to look at what my Ustream data is telling me when I hit render. Hit Shift-Z in the viewport here. So you can see a render there. And okay, CPU's only at like 70%. I think we should be fine. So rendering a small window is okie doke. All right, so we're on cycles render. And to match this lighting, again, I'm going to remove the colors off of this guy. I'm going to make it like a clay rendering, not a textured rendering. Because with textures on there, it can make it less discernible, the lighting less discernible. So that's why I'm going to remove all of the materials I've got on this character. Add a new one, and I'll just call this gray. And I want it to be actually a principled BSDF. It's not going to be a ton of shader work in this stream, but there is going to be a little bit, just a little bit. And so with that gray, I'm also going to copy that to our other objects in the scene. And let's see, make sure that I have this cowboy, this wrangler selected as the active object, copy material to others. All right, excellent. The first thing that I'm going to do is try and find an HDRI environment map that matches what we see in the artwork. It's not going to be perfect because I don't know what image they use, but I can find one that's fairly close. So back to the World tab. We're going to change the color here. We're looking at the surface, and I'm going to change the color from a gray to environment texture. And I'm going to click Open and go find a Creative Commons source HDRI. CCBY. And let's see, if I'm trying to remember which one I used before. Maybe it was this one. Okay, so we've selected that particular HDRI. And those are free, by the way, to get from openfootage.net. The smaller resolution is free, so it's a really cool resource. That's one that I've used a lot. Also, actually, I haven't used this one yet, but HDRI Haven was recently made open source and free to use. So that's honestly probably a better resource given Greg Zoll's. He's the one that owns that and runs it, and he's got incredible skills when it comes to HDRI capture. Okay, so I want to orient my HDRI environment to resemble the artwork down there. I'm going to go to my in panel and turn on world background. Actually, let's do that for both of these. Where is it? Oh, display world background. There we go. Right now, it doesn't look anything like it. We'll switch to the node editor down here. And I need to go to the world option. And we need to set up a couple things that enable us to manipulate the texture coordinates. First, I need a texture coordinate node, and then converter, I'm sorry, vector mapping comes after that. We'll plug those into our environment texture. All right. Haven't seen anything in the chat for a while. Is everybody doing well? You can still see the stream, hopefully. But anyway, if you got questions, please let them rip. But all right, so what was I doing? I want to reorient my environment texture to resemble the reference image. So I'm going to use the rotation in Z. Just rotate that around, because if I recall correctly, okay, yeah, there's a bright spot over here. That's what I'm looking for. I want to put that behind the character. So let's keep bringing around the Z. There we go. All right, that kind of looks like the image, actually. Got a tree trunk in the back. Though that is the sun. It might read very clearly as the sun, but if we look at the lighting in our reference, the sun is actually coming from the front of the character. It's not backlit. So I should probably hide the sun. Maybe something like this. Let's see. And then orient it like that, perhaps. I might cheat because I've already rehearsed this, and I might try and look at the actual coordinates. So give me a second, let me cheat. I know that's pretty lame. Let's see, am I even using the same file, Autumn Forest? Yeah, okay, I am. I have it set to 23 degrees and 65.3 in the Z. That does not seem right. Oh, negative 65. Okay, that's right. So yeah, I was just referencing my rehearsal file to try and get that as close as possible. Because there is a lot of settings. Remember, this turned out to be more complex than I thought. And I'm just going to maybe reference that if I need to. Hello, Diskin, good to see you. Let's see, a question. With Node Wrangler enabled, you can add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes automatically if you select the environment texture and press Control-T. Not a question, but advice. I never knew that. So with the Node Wrangler, let's make sure that's enabled. Okay, it was not enabled. It is now. What are you saying? So if you add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes automatically by selecting the environment texture and hitting Control-T, that is awesome. Oops, let's delete that. Control-T. That's amazing. I'm using that from now on. Brilliant. So what were those values? 23.1 and negative 65. Thank you for sharing that, Katarina. I appreciate that. That is very helpful. Okay, great. So we've got the environment texture set up. And if the music's too loud or anything, let me know. Just in case it is. But all right, so I've got this environment texture set up, but we've still got some big differences between that and the art. Particularly, our image is green and with a blue sky, and this has like what I interpret as a forest based on the leaves falling and just these kind of shapes. So that's why I'm using a forest background. But they have like orange, purple, and red tree leaves, but then yellow light. So that is very different. It works for any texture, not just the environment. Awesome. That's really helpful. Okay, music's not too loud. That's great. So we got to really mess with the color of our environment texture if we're going to match. So let's see what we can do about that. If let's see, move over my background nodes and the world output, let's add a color RGB curves to our environment. All right, and I'm going to reference here. What I want to do, let's see, let's just try and let's try and tweak this without me referencing and cheating on my other file. So I definitely want to increase the red channel, right? Because that's where a lot of these colors, they're on the warm spectrum. So in the RGB curves, we have the C, which stands for, I don't even know, maybe color, general color. Let's see if there's a tooltip. There's not. I think it's general color, like the darks and brights through all the channels, but then this R represents the red channel, green channel, and blue channel. So if I want the image to be more red, I'm going to click on R and then just pull this up like that. And you'll see our image start to become a little more red. And let's see, I want especially the high end to be red. A little bit of the low end. And then there's a bit of an S curve for the green. So I want, in the dark values, the green to go way down. You'll see that we get a lot more purple and red coming up. And then in the upper register, in the higher end, I want there to be more green because I want red and green together sort of make yellow. And that's what I'm trying to get, the yellow color in the brighter spot of the image. And then for the blue, so if I want to add more blue, remember we've got more red already, and adding more blue will make it more purpley. Okay, if we take that down, it becomes more reddish, more warm. And so let me reference my file. This is another bit of an S curve from what I did earlier. Something like that. Okay, so we're headed towards that direction in terms of coloration in the sky. But it's really hard to get that sky to be yellow. Really hard, actually. And sorry, referencing my file one more time. Wow, I did a lot. Weird. Sorry you're not seeing this. I wanted it to be smooth, but I'm going to just recreate it. Maybe I underestimated just how complex it was to get this coloration to be what I wanted. So after the RGB curves, I have a color hue saturation node. And here I'm taking the hue down to 0.45. You can see that that takes it further into the purple spectrum. Saturation at 0.8. I'm actually desaturating it a bit. And the reason being, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. So that's kind of the color that I'm going to start with for now. And let's see the render. What's the render doing for us? Okay. We don't have a key light, so it looks terrible. And also the principled shader has, by default, really, really clear reflections. Let me see where this is at. Okay, so this roughness is at 0 and the specular level is at 5. That means when I say specular, that's kind of how reflective, how non-metallically reflective it is. So 0.5 is pretty high. I'm going to take that down to like 0.2. Roughness I need to increase so it doesn't look like, you know, glass. And that needs to be like 0.3, let's say. Okay. Is that what I have over here? Let me check. I actually have the roughness at 0.2, not 0.3. All right. So we've got the background set up. We're missing a major element right now. Okay, C is, I see from UMA, C does stand for color. That's the highlights, the top end, and shadows. Okay, great. That's kind of what I assumed, but wasn't really sure. Thank you for clarifying that. We need a key light, big time. So let's switch to the, I actually want to leave this view in camera, render that. And let's switch this to the 3D view from the node editor. And I want to add, let's turn off matte cap. Let's add a lamp. And I'm going to go with an area lamp. Just kind of put it in front. If I'm looking at the character, it's front left, screen left. Okay, so as you can see in the viewport, that's kind of the angle that's fairly clear if we look at the lighting, given where the shadows are. Also, where the shadow is pointed from the character, that's very distinct where the light is placed. And we've got that matching fairly well over here. So that looks good. Let's change the light to be orange, orangish yellow, as we can see in the reference image. Now, this is very simply textured, and it looks like an Amazon box. So that tells me that the texture she has is kind of a yellowy brown, which I'm not really doing that. So I'm going to kind of fudge the recreation by making the light source a little more yellow than maybe he or she did in the original image. So let's see, with my light set up, let's change that to a yellowy orange. And something I learned from the rehearsal is that, I'm just going to turn on border rendering so we're not wasting any CPU, is initially I tried to match the lighting like pixel for pixel, color for color in the actual render, but I found that it was extremely difficult to get this level of color in the shadows. And so what I opted to do anyway was desaturate my elements in the actual 3D scene and get the coloration correct in compositing. So if you remember when I left off with the environment texture, I desaturated the color a little bit. And the reason for that was this. Preemptively, I was desaturating because I'm going to get full coloration manipulation in compositing. Oh, C is for chroma. Technically, something from color theory. Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure that makes sense. I've heard that before for the RGB node, in case that was disconnected from when I was saying that earlier. All right, let's go through the scene. What else are we missing? We're missing a key element in the camera, which is depth of field, major depth of field. And right now our camera has 0 of it. And what's cool about this is, where do I have the camera? Over here. Let me move that. You can see the rig elements in there. I'm going to move it off of that. There we go. So we need to add depth of field. And I was saying what's cool about the depth of field is it will blur out, because it's so extreme, it will blur out the ground plane and mix it with the background. And that's cool because you don't really want to see the end of the plane. That's a really clear sign that, you know, maybe someone less experienced is lighting the scene. You really want it to, you don't want that to distract. So, all right, depth of field. We're going to the camera settings. I'm going to enable, let's see, I need the limits enabled for the display, and you can see that line sticks out, kind of the direction of the camera, and then start to drag out this distance value, which will be this yellow crosshair, and that represents the focal plane, like the point of focus. So I'm going to put that kind of on the character's face, about like that. And then for the size, the aperture radius, we're going to switch that to, I think 0.15 is what I did earlier, 0.15. And now we're going to see major depth of field happen. And we can see that the ground plane sort of blurs out. So that's pretty awesome. Making just another step closer. Now, even though I've got a very purple background, the shadows are hardly purple at all. And that was the thing that really I struggled with during the rehearsal, is that I couldn't make these shadows really appear purple. And so I'm going to have to deal with that right now. It's kind of a disconnect from the original image, but it also tells me maybe I need to hop into compositing pretty quickly to try and get that coloration, to confirm whether I need to do more of that in the 3D view. So I'm going to try and render a small, let's see, 50% of 1920 by 1080. And this is going to be boring, but I'm just going to actually have to render it. This is kind of a fun fact, trivia. This is the first time I've ever rendered, oh wait, let me escape out of that. First time I've ever rendered live before. Isn't that weird? Because in my courses, I just like speed that process up, but you get to see the raw value of watching a rendered render. All right, what was I stopping for? The performance. Oh yeah, okay, so I forgot to do this, but since I'm streaming, I'm gonna take advantage of this threads option where auto detect will just grab all of my available threads. Well, I'm gonna set it to fixed and change it to 8, whereas I normally have 12. I'm just going to fix that to 8, leave 4 cores over for the stream. And then also I like to change the tile size to 32 by 32. Find that usually works a little bit faster. Also, first plug for an amazing new feature that I've done is denoising. Oh my gosh, I was skeptical how cool this was, but it is absolutely amazing. Enable that and set your samples much lower than you ever normally would. Like I would, to get a clear image, usually set this up to like 512, but 128 is going to be more than enough to clear this render up beautifully. So let me render that image and let that run for a bit. Check on my stream settings. So yeah, CPU's up to 97%. It's in bright red, but I think we're going to be okay. Looks like I'm still streaming solidly. Cool. Let's see. John Crawford, C++, question mark. I'm not sure what your C++. Okay, you're using CPU for rendering, not CUDA. Yeah, so I don't have a GPU that's compatible with cycles, unfortunately. I've never really been able to take advantage of GPU rendering. Pretty big bummer, but I don't know, maybe the next computer I have, I'll put more in, I'll invest more into the GPU, but I just have always used CPU rendering, so I know it's kind of slow. Zach, do you know about any cheats for matching the colors? I'm colorblind. Oh my, I've never thought about that before, actually. I don't know about any cheats other than color picking, and specifically for a colorblind person, I don't know, I'm really out of my element with that. I apologize for not really, I've never been faced with that before. Never had someone not like a student tell me about their color blindness. So, man, I'm sorry. I really wish I had some tips for you there, but I don't. Man, I'm sorry about that. Other than color picking, just using the color picker itself, you know, between your reference image and your render. That's the only kind of thing I could maybe suggest. But anyway, I'm gonna step over to the node editor. Now that I have an image rendered, we can switch over to our image nodes, or compositing nodes rather. Image nodes did not sound right coming out. And let's start tweaking these colors a bit. And I'm gonna get my cheat sheet up so you can, so I can see what I've done before. It's not too much, mostly in the RGB curves again. Okay, cool. Just checking. All right, so one of the things, let me get this big in the viewport by using a backdrop and adding an output viewer node. Shift, click, and hold to add a, what is this called, a reroute node. So it has it going into both of them, and there you can see the image now pops up in the back. Gives me some real-time feedback of my changes. So let's add a color RGB curves node. And let's think about what's different between this and our reference image. Now, I think the contrast is one of them. Our darks are a bit darker in the reference image, and they're too light here. Also, it's much more desaturated in this case. So I'm going to crank up the levels a bit, just increase saturation by pulling down the darks and raising the lights just a little bit. Something like this. And then for the red channel, let's remember what I did here. I think just in a general sense, I'm bringing up the reds. Looks pretty good. And now for the green, I still want to get this blue sky to read as yellow, very distinctly yellow. That's probably the biggest thing that's bothering me right now, the discrepancy between the two. And to do that, I need to bring up the green, or at least leave it the same, and try and get more yellow up into that top end. Let's bring it down on the lower end. The more I take away out of that, the more red and blue are mixing. But as I bring it up, we have a nice yellowy tint to the character, which matches more our reference image. What about blue? I think definitely in the shadows here. Oh wait, whoops. Let's hit Alt-V to zoom in to our rendered image. That's how you do that in the node editor, Alt-V, and then hitting V will actually shrink it. So I can still get I'm still getting the problem of the shadows not getting that same kind of color. That's one of the biggest challenges that I've faced in this. So let me bring up the blues and specifically the dark values. Is that what I did earlier? Yeah. Zoom out a bit. All right, well, I don't want that much because now we're kind of losing some of the reds unless I bring the reds up. Okay, now we're starting to enter into that similar color. It's feeling very similar. Or it's feeling more similar, let's say. So that's looking pretty good, I think. But it's still not fixing the sky. That blue sky is just throwing everything off. And so we're going to cheat that because I tweaked these curves a lot and just never really got that to appear yellow until I faked it hardcore in the 3D view. So let's do that. Let me see, I was looking at Zach's response. No worries, I do color picker when I shade or texture. I also have an image with tons of colors on it that I bring in if I don't have any reference. I really need to look through your gallery, Zach, because I'm so curious now to know like what a colorblind artist, like how they present stuff. But man, that's so interesting to me. I kind of just want to like pick your brain about what that's like. But getting back to the render, okay, so I'm trying to make this blue sky appear yellow, and then we're going to fake it in the 3D view. So let's go back to the 3D view and add, so what I'm going to do, the idea that I came up with is use a transparent object as like a card to fit in front of that blue, kind of like a filter on a lens. And it's just going to be yellow. It's going to be transparently yellow. So let's hit Shift-A and add a circle. And then in edit mode, I'm going to fill that circle just so that it's a polygon, a filled face. And then we're going to rotate that to look as directly at the camera, or generally directly at the camera, something like this. And we're going to use the depth of field in combination with a shader to blur out the edges, because I'm going to move this really far back, and using local Z can push that straight backwards. And we're going to, if we look in the camera view, we can't, okay, I can still see it. I'm going to scale this up and just cover that area, and then we're going to put a transparent yellow shader on there. And it actually works surprisingly well. You might be skeptical at this point, but let's quickly add a new material and show you what I'm talking about. Add a new material. Let's call it sky filter. And we're going to change it to a transparent BSDF and use yellow as our color. All right, so now you can see that we're changing the sky to be yellow. Make that a little more saturated. So awesome, that's working great for the sky, but it's making everything else brown kind of around it, what used to be purple and red and pink. So we need to fade that out, and the depth of field just using that is actually pretty effective. See if I push it, eventually we're going to cross the clipping plane, but I can push it much further back, let's say like there. You know, so we're really far away at this point. And then select my camera, and let's increase the clipping value to be like 300. And then scale this up. Move it into position. But even though it's really far back and the depth of field is helping, it's not a foolproof solution. So I'm going to scale this way up, much bigger. And I'm going to use a shader to actually feather off the edge. Let's see, John's saying apply a grayscale filter. Let's see, when I hear you say that, I'm wondering if you mean kind of desaturate the whole image and then just create, like, add your own colors in through maybe color balance or something like that. I guess that's a way to approach it. I've never really worked that way. So maybe if that's not what you mean, please maybe elaborate a bit with another comment. But that's not the approach I would take to grayscale it personally. Unless you're talking about color blindness. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what you mean there. All right, so I'm gonna feather off the edges of this shape using a material. So we'll go back to the node editor and to object materials. And what we're doing in here is we're going to use a texture gradient texture. So Zach, I just have trouble with reds mostly, sometimes really light green and yellow. For the fundamentals of lighting course, I just Googled light bulb color values to get the lamps in the right scene. Well, that's a really good way to approach that, to tackle it, like get the actual, I think they call it Kelvin scale for lighting colors. So that's a really good way to approach it. But I'm just fascinated by it, by you being colorblind and doing CG art. That's awesome. Okay, so back to the gradient texture. We're going to plug that in. Well, first I'm going to hit Shift Control and click on it to add it to a viewer node. Okay, and let's see what that gradient texture is doing. I'm going to use that I'm going to use that tip that, who gave it to me? I want to give some good credit. Katarina suggested using Control T to add our mapping nodes, texture coordinate and mapping, because I want to move the gradient over. What am I trying to do? Let's see. I'm trying to make the gradient there be a radial gradient in the middle of our circle, and then it just fades to another color as we reach the edges. And I believe I did this with the location. Is that how I did it? Let me zoom in on that. Oh, wait a minute. It's linear. I need to switch it to spherical. That's what's throwing me off. Okay, so I want to position this. There we go. All right, so now I've moved the gradient to start in the middle and then fade off towards the edges. It's pretty subtle, but if we add a converter color ramp, that will make it less subtle, more apparent. Let's go to B-spline and then drag these flags really close to each other. All right, and push that. Let's reposition it a little bit. There we go. It's pretty much in the center. Okay, negative 0.5. That seems to be perfect, negative 0.5. All right, that seems to be perfectly in the center. Okay, great. So now you can see maybe you can guess what we're going to do here, where when we plug this into the transparent, we're going to make the middle yellow and then the outside be white, because white transparent is perfectly clear. So let's get rid of the viewer node and add a color mix node, mix RGB. Copy this color, plug it into color slot 2, and then color slot 1 will make perfectly white. Value all the way up. It's good for an eclipse effect too. Yeah, that's a good point. Never thought of it like that. All right, so now we've got white on the outside, yellow in the center. Let's plug that into our transparent BSDF and see what that does. Now we've got a much better feathering effect. And I can position that in the 3D view just to color that light specifically. Maybe scale it up a little bit. Awesome. Now, man, isn't that a hack of hacks? I don't think I've ever done this before, but it seemed to work pretty well. It is still much more subtle than our image, but when we render this, I'm hoping that it gets us that much closer. Let's remember what the composite looks like. We'll go to the viewer node. So that's where we're at currently. And let's switch to slot 2 and do a render. Okay. See, I'm trying to remember what else I did. As this renders, I'm going to think about what's still looking bad. And for one, I think the material on our character is a little bit too shiny. I want it to have a little bit of specularity, but not quite this much. So I'm going to tone that down and maybe increase the strength of our area light. I don't know. Let me see once the composite finishes, but I'm curious. Are you guys aware of the community thread that a lot of us have been contributing to about the lighting match? After you watch this stream, hopefully it will inspire you to participate with us. But there's some really cool examples in there, and I would love to see you guys participate. So maybe check that out after the stream is over. All right, great. That actually gets us much closer. Wow, I'm kind of relieved. I was afraid that it wasn't going to match. But look just how much more similar the colors are. So let's try the color picking thing. I think just holding Control and right-clicking, moving your mouse, you can see that we have color information down here at the bottom. So you can see all those values. So if I, like hover around this pink color and then hover down here. Oh, wait a minute. Bummer. That's the color is crap. The color is like off of the UI, the window down here, which kind of backfired. But so I was trying to demonstrate how you would do the color picker, but I'm not really sure how I would do that right now. Maybe create another window. Yeah, that's probably the best idea. All right, let's try that again. So the center up here, get towards the yellow. I'm kind of eyeballing it, but looks pretty close. Similar with the pinks. Yeah, you can go about this much more scientifically and document like these numbers if you want to get really close, but I'm not trying to be that anal about it. I'm just trying to get it pretty close. And that looks pretty good, actually. But I'm actually glad we did this, because having them comparable side by side is going to be really good for us matching this. So okay, looking at this, the character's face that hits the sun most directly is much brighter than our character. So I think I need to increase the strength of the lamp source, and also I want more blues back here. So maybe increasing the blues and the dark spectrum. Let's try that. Okay, so going back to my blue channel, I'm going to try and crank that up just in the very darkest of spectrums. Maybe also crank down the dark values. Okay, yeah, that's looking much better. Okay, wow, that's looking much better. Nice. All right, so that's another step closer. It's looking better. Let's I think the light definitely needs to be brighter. Let's try that. Let's change that. Make the area light smaller to make the shadows sharper. So I actually think, if anything, I might need to make the shadows a little softer. If we look right here, this should be a fairly sharp shadow if it was sharp. I think what throws us off is the fact that the model itself is very sharp, and the sharp edges make the shadows look sharp. But if you actually study the shadow of the character, it's very soft. So I actually think maybe the opposite. I need to increase the size. Let's say to like 1. Let's zoom in here. Let that clear up a bit. Yeah, see, I think making the size bigger and softening that matches more the lighting. And the shadows on the ground look darker. Let me go back to my render. Yeah, you're right about that. They are darker. Okay, that's a good point. We're gonna revisit that too. How am I gonna do that? Because what I'm thinking about, if we analyze this image, the ground plane is a very light color, not dissimilar from this gray that we've been using. And so when you have a light ground plane, it's going to make the light bounce up and brighten up the shadows, including right here, it's just going to make that shadow brighter. But in the render, it's super dark. I wonder, maybe I can further enhance the contrast. Let's try that. Oh, wait, I did already do that. Okay, I was looking at the render pre-composition tweaks. So yeah, you're right. The shadows are darker, and I have an idea for how we can address that. I'm thinking we lower the global illumination bounces, because the more time I spend on this, like it baffles me how dark she got these shadows. I don't know why I keep calling it a she, with the artist a she, but how dark the artist got the shadows. It's almost like there's very little fill light entering the shadow compared to mine. So let me try brightening up the light source. Let's change that to like 200. Is that going to be too bright? No, I don't think that's too bright. Let's go with 200. And then, like if we go to my render settings and look at the light paths. So we're at, the default is, it looks like we got reflective caustics, pretty high settings. I mean, you know, fully featured settings. Maybe we can bump down some of these bounces to make the shadows a little darker. Let's try like 5 for the max and like 2 for the min. Did that even do much? What if we do 1? Okay, that seemed to make it much darker. But even still, it's not nearly as dark as hers. That might have to be a concession for me. That might be something that's a little too hard to match. The ground plane is a bit too shiny. Now that's true. That's another concession, actually, that you bring that up. She has a texture. I don't know why I keep doing that. I don't know if it's just the pink and purple, but that doesn't make any sense. There's clearly a texture, like a ground texture in this image, and I was not planning on recreating that, but it is, it's not reflective at all. And so what I've found is that adding the reflectivity actually incorporates the background into it kind of mixes the background with the ground plane a little bit better, because let me see if I can do an example. If I turn off reflectivity on the ground, here we go. Material, if I turn off reflectivity completely through the specular option, you can see that now there's a very harsh disconnect where you see the spotlight nature of the area light, and then there's nothing on the backside. And it reads as the end of the ground plane. But if you just add a little bit of specularity, it incorporates the colors from the environment. And that is what blends between the ground plane and the environment pretty well. So that's why I did that. I didn't really explain that up until now, but I learned that during the rehearsal. So I want there to be a little bit of reflectivity for that reason, but you're right, it doesn't look like the image. But there's a little bit of give and take here. I'm trying to get the essentials. I'm not as concerned with like matching texture quality and stuff like that. But to your point, you are right that it is too reflective. The character itself, I think, is also too reflective. Let me think about that. What if I turn the character down like make the roughness a little bit higher, 0.3. Yeah, that's kind of a compromise between the point you make, Sabi404, about the ground plane being too shiny. If I increase this roughness up to like 0.4, we still get a little bit of incorporation from the background in the reflection of the ground plane. That actually might be too high for my taste. Anyway, 0.3, I'm going to go with that. Is it better to use a separate shadow render pass and combine it during compositing? That's not a bad idea, actually. I didn't... we're kind of running out of time, but... Well, maybe I can go an hour and a half. I hadn't planned on that, and I've not used the new shadow catcher feature, actually. But that would be a good idea, maybe. The problem is, so this is a problem I'm foreseeing, is if you start to depend too much on compositing, your image can stop making sense, right? Like if you tweak one particular shadow to be darker than the others, and then you tweak the color in one area rather than the others, it just starts making less sense in global terms. Yeah, in general. But that's a concern. That's why I have kind of trained myself not to depend. I do render passes less and less. And if I do render passes, it's more for like control over I'm kind of talking in circles. When I do animations, I use render passes. But when I'm rendering just an image, I rarely use render passes because the freedom on the back end of compositing can get you into trouble. It can make you tweak things that maybe you shouldn't be. So I'm trying to describe kind of why I avoid over compositing with render layers. But anyway, frankly, it's a good idea to just render out the shadow catcher and add that in later if I really want to fixate on how dark this shadow is. But let's try color picking. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go to the UV image editor. Let's color pick the viewer node. Let's look at the value of these shadows, like right in here. Control right click. So if I'm looking for the V value, where is that? Maybe it's B for, no, it's not right. Okay, there it is, the value. 0.314, 0.29, so about 0.3 is where the value of these shadows are. Let me see what this is. Okay, these values are at like 0.2. So it's not that far away, actually. We're not that different. What if I add a little bit more red into the shadows? I mean, you can maybe start to put together that this can be a bit of an endless process. What does that look like? No, I don't think I want that. Let's delete that. Yeah, I want there to be more blue in these particular dark areas. So I'm not gonna. The shadows I think the shadows are reading a little more pink to me, but over here they're a little more purpley blue. That's all right. I'm getting pretty close to nitpicking, and I want to re-render with this brighter light, also with the global illumination toned down a bit. I think I wanted it at like 5 and 3. All right, let's try and do another render in another slot. All right. See what that gets us to. Can you use a negative value on lamps to subtract light? I think you can. I've never actually used negative value in cycles. Back in the day when I used Maya, in Mental Ray, I know that you could do negative values in the light. We'll try that. We'll just put in a light and do a negative value, see what that does. But I think I like the lighting value a bit better, having it bumped up. It's looking pretty cool. I love the extreme depth of field. I need to use that more often. It makes things look smaller, kind of like a little figurine. And I think that's a cool look at times. Combine it during compositing. Anyway, Sabi404, I hope I answered your question and didn't like downplay it or anything. I apologize if I did, but it might be a convenience thing too, why I just train myself not to depend highly on render layers. They're kind of a pain to set up too, and when you render out, like, you have to worry about other image files, and anyway, I just try and keep it a little more simple. Okay, great. So we're getting a little bit of blowout now in the light being so strong, but I do like this a lot better. I think we're closer. So let me downgrade the, in the node editor, using the chroma. I believe we have correctly realized that it's the chroma value. Let's just tone that down a bit. Now it's not blowing out quite so much. Actually, the yellow is matching better. That's looking pretty good. Let's look at the UV image editor side by side. Nice. Yeah, I think this is coming out pretty well. Let's see. Let's think about anything else. One thing, the leaves. That's something I could add. Would you guys like to see the leaves? I think that just adds some interesting depth to the image that can be lost without it. But I mean, that involves getting a leaf texture. I didn't really plan for that, but maybe we can wing it and see what happens. But so the leaves are obviously something that I don't have, but I also think there's a bit of a vignette coming around the corners. Like maybe I can add a purpley pink vignette to the image. That would kind of make it match a little bit closer over here. So let's try that. Let's go to the node editor. And this can all be done in compositing with a matte, where is it? Ellipse mask. Let's do that. I'm going to hit Control, Shift Control, click on that to just see the ellipse mask by itself. Do something like this, and then add a filter blur. I like fast Gaussian, and we'll go to like 50 and 50, and then use the multiplier down here to go like 5. How about 3? Okay, so now we've got some nice softened edges in the corners. Oh, Mikhail said, it can also be that some of the color values were altered in Photoshop by hand. Totally valid point. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. But yeah, I guess they could have done that, totally. It's actually a fun exercise trying to match it perfectly, but at the end of the day, I'm not actually planning on doing that. But it does make a fun exercise. The whole point of this is to get you thinking about, look at the different, what are the shadows like in this lighting? Where is the direction of the light? How did they compose this image to get this effect that we think is appealing? That's the whole idea, so we can apply that then to whatever custom renders we do with our own stuff. So the actual purpose is not to match it 100%, but just to get into the mind of the artist. And the comments you guys are asking are evidence that you guys are getting into that mindset, and that is pretty awesome. All right, so I've got a black and white vignette right now, and I want to change that to be a little purpley pink. So I'm going to plug that into a mix node, leave the top value as white, and take the bottom value down to a darker pinkish color. All right, and now let's mix this. Let's see. I'm going to do it. Let's try before the RGB curves node. Add it, color, mix node. Let's put it in here. and change the mix to be, let's look at that. There we go. So that's what the RGB curves node is going to do to it. I think I like that. That looks pretty close in the corners. But let's change it to a multiply. Take it down the value to like 0.5. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Let's see, UV image editor. So yeah, just a subtle vignette, I think, takes us a little bit closer. Yeah, we're actually pretty close. It's not looking bad. Oh, one thing I want to do before we forget is, let's see, someone was asking about, oh yeah, M. Leonard asking about negative light value. That's an intriguing idea. Let's test it, see what it does. So like what I would do to test that in this situation is like, let's take a lamp, point lamp. What do I do with that lamp? Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. And let's try some negative light. What an interesting idea. Size, let's do use node strength negative 10. Oh my gosh, it works. -1? That is wild. Do I have 2 lamps in here? So I'm moving the light around now. And let me turn that off for a second. I must have 2 lamps going on. Because the bottom of the fence is glowing. Oh, yeah, okay. I don't know what this lamp is all about. I don't even know how that got in there. All right, so the point light down here at the bottom, you can't see my outliner, I think, because of my face, but anyway, the negative value, that's kind of blowing my mind. If I go to -1, it totally darkens that area. We get some, obviously we're maybe venturing into the highly unrealistic, non-physically correct realm. But look at that. It's like a black hole. How wild. Anyway, so I guess you could theoretically use that if I turn it on and off. The shadows do get darker in there. Fascinating idea. Wild. That kind of makes me nervous, to be honest with you. So I'm going to delete that. But now that I know it works, I don't know, another tool in the tool belt. Pretty cool. All right, so we're looking at the image. Is there anything else we can do? I don't think anyone voted to put the what do you call these? The leaves in there. And so I don't know. That kind of wraps it up pretty nicely, actually. Just would be interested in rendering this larger. But let's do one more comparison. Switch this back to the UV image editor. Oh, whoops. And let's just take a nice long look at these guys. See if there's anything else that sticks out to us. If you have any ideas, if anything is, I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but if you see something that's sticking out to you as being kind of detrimental to this recreation, let me know. But one thing that I wish I had was more of this bright reddish pink. I have just the hints of it, but I don't have a definitive color like that. So I guess if I really wanted to hack something together, it looks like it's part of the environment in the reference image, but here maybe, I don't know, add some spheres way back in the background and make those pink. I don't know, it's kind of weird. Can you compare it to the one you did before stream? That's a great idea. Let's try it. Image, open. Here we go. Oh wait, that's not what I wanted. All right, so here's the one I did before. Let's look at this one. Wow, that's interesting to see where it was different. So more purple over here. Looks like some RGB curve information is just a little different. Camera angle slightly off, or just different, I guess. Which one do you guys like better? Left or right? Before pre-stream, rehearsal, or the live version? I like that there's more red in the shadows over here, and I'm wondering why. The ground plane is different. That's a pretty big difference, actually. Huh. Well, here's an idea. I think if I remember, I think I made the ground plane like pink to a degree. Don't forget to save your project. Good call. I never or rarely remember to do that on stream. Let's do that. Call it 2. There's more color in the shadows on the pre-stream, absolutely, and I like that. And I think it does have to do with, I remember now changing the color of the ground to be pink. And now that I'm revisiting this in my memory, and I did that because of the shadows. I wanted the light to bounce up and pick up some pink color, where I didn't do that in this image. But the trade-off is that this image looks a lot closer to the example because the ground is not exactly pink. Let's do that for a couple more minutes. The live version is better. Nice. Left is more similar. The right one. Okay, cool. I like to see what you guys are thinking. But let's just do that as a last effort to try and change the color of these shadows to be more pinky purple. We'll go to the 3D view and select this object. I'm going to make a new material just by hitting the plus button. Call it the floor. And switch this to the node editor. And if I recall, what I did was similar to this card here. It was actually the same kind of material. So let me go into that material and copy. Okay. I need to go to the object materials. I'm going to copy this right here. Copy those nodes and paste it into our floor material. Because it's the same idea. If we look at that, yeah, okay, so that's what I want. I want this to be a radial effect that's going to be white in the middle, which is what we had before with the regular gray shader. But then as we fade out from the character, it's going to start turning pink. Let's see here. So let's look at our mix, something like that. Okay, but I need to really dial in the values so that the white is closer to the character. Okay, I actually need to go this way. Do you guys kind of see what I'm trying to do? Just tighten up this circle to be around our character with a gradual fade of pink. All right, that might be okay. All right, let's try that. And plug that into our principled BSDF for the base color. All right, so it's pretty subtle. Let's try cranking up the color a little bit, the saturation. All right, not bad. All right, let's do a render. Let's see if that's, because I want to keep this desaturated. Let's see if that's enough to get me what I want, to get that color in the shadows. Go to the UV image editor. Okay, that's the viewer node. Let's go to render result, slot 4. All right, let's render this. Turn off rendering in the viewport. Get ready for comparison. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I've ever put 2 render results side by side. It looks like they're synced. You can't look at different slots at the same time. Never knew that. All right. I'm excited to see what the difference in the color is like of the shadows. Sorry for making you guys sit through actual rendering. I know that's like watching paint dry. Just think, maybe one day, and one day soon, we might be doing this all in real time. Oh yeah, much more color in the shadows. Look at that. All right, let's look at Alt J. Yeah, tons more color in the shadows. Kind of darkens everything a bit, which actually looks more like the image. So you know, it doesn't where the ground plane in the image kind of falls off, it's still a lighter whitish gray color, or even a little purple, but in ours it gets much darker back there, but because of that, our shadows get much more purpley, and that looks really close. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Nice. Man, this is fun. So I hope you guys picked up some things. Please participate in the community thread. It's just been a lot of fun, and I'd love to see more submissions there. But if you guys liked this, maybe I'll do it again, maybe periodically, just as a way to brush up on some lighting skills. I think it's a good exercise for that. But all right, that's going to be it for this stream. Next week, we've got a really cool stream with a guy named Tom Wright. And I hadn't heard of him until a couple weeks ago when we got introduced, but he's got a crazy industry experience, work history. He's worked on huge projects, both game and film, and he's a Blender user, and he uses Blender at work. And I'm just excited that we got introduced to him, and he's willing to do live streams. Maybe we can get him teaching to some capacity. We're working on it, but that's going to be a cool stream just to get a very insider, some insider time with an industry professional. And we're just going to start off with like maybe asking about him, his story, how he got into the industry, and what it's been like working in the industry, what it's like seeing Blender, using Blender around the top level professionals, both in game and film. And yeah, so that's going to be fun. That's going to be next week, an hour-long interview with him. So thanks for watching. And before I say goodbye, I'm going to prepare to turn it off so there's no awkward silence. And yeah, so thanks you. I'll see you next week. Please contribute to the thread if you're interested in this kind of lighting stuff. And have a great rest.